Hi, everybody. I wanted to just bring myself and everybody else up to date on the situation with Julian Assange. This is a case I've actually been following for the nearly 14 years that this has been happening. I was an early follower of WikiLeaks, a great admirer of their work because they were revealing things that were not being revealed by the media, which started to become more and more obvious as time wore on, particularly since the Iraq War, where there were so many lies and cover-ups that were so obvious because things were not what they were um, told to the public. And it was this kind of bizarre open secret where the emperor wore no clothes, but it was never actually revealed, and the general public doesn't question, especially certain media outlets, which they grew to trust and which in a deliberate way were always subtly sort of made to be the authority on different issues. And still today, you have many people who really don't question many of the things that are going on around the world. And so it's very interesting to look at this chart. I'm going to look at Julian Assange's chart. I'm going to look at the US chart compared to his chart. I'm going to look at the CIA's chart because they're the ones who are really after him. I'm going to look at the chart of his trial today and also the extradition hearing, which was actually the one that started this whole particular phase of his nearly 12 years of detention without any actual charge in the UK, entirely against UK law, international law, human rights law, Geneva Convention on Torture, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to go into all of those things. There's a lot of information out there. I want to point out a really interesting piece by Glenn Greenwald from yesterday. He posted a part of it onto YouTube and most of it onto his Rumble channel. A really, really reliable source of news and information, Glenn Greenwald. As many outcasts have to be, that's the way it goes. You have to be an outcast to be reliable these days. Anyone who follows the official line just doesn't actually have any freedom of speech. And so Glenn Greenwald is the journalist who exposed Edward Snowden. And in those days, newspapers like The Guardian and even the New York Times, which is essentially now a mouthpiece for the Pentagon, were actually a little more free. And they did actually have investigative journalists. And now that's no longer the case. It's a 100% different ownership, different perspective, different purview. And so highly suspect when they report things. Anyway, the point being that he made a really interesting comment about this whole near hysteria about Navalny and the death of this Putin opposition politician, Alexei Navalny, which was a few days ago, I've forgotten exactly which day, and how that is drummed up around the West, and quite deliberately so, because this particular hearing is now happening. And it's a distraction away from the torture and illegal imprisonment and the abuse of human rights that is being suffered by Julian Assange. And so Glenn is asking the questions, why doesn't the media or the government get hyped up when an American dissident, even a journalist like Gonzalo Lira, for example, is in prison, tortured, and then dies in prison by Ukraine for what Ukraine described to be supporting Russian propaganda when he was simply reporting on what was happening on the ground during the war. So Gonzalo Lira died a few weeks ago in January. His father believes that the US government and the Ukraine government are responsible for his death. He is a US citizen. He's a dual citizen, I think, of Chile as well. But an investigative reporter who was widely regarded, and no news about him in the mainstream media because it doesn't suit the narrative. Now, one last thing I want to point out before I look at the charts is that there is a lot of propaganda. I've said this again and again, even in sort of other basic readings, but we are being so highly propagandized. And the thing about propaganda, and this is the CIA's intention around propaganda, is that when you're doing it right, people don't know. And as the CIA director in the 1940s said, when everything that people believe is a lie, you know that you will have succeeded. So just bear that in mind when you watch the news, when you hear people from any position of authority speaking about any issue. Hold it lightly and ask questions. And if you're not interested in that kind of thing, then at the very least, don't spread the, don't get, let's say, emotionally involved in the news that you're hearing, in the way that you're being guided to with things like Navalny's death. Notice that there, in propaganda, there's always a combination of information, misinformation, and emotion. Real news doesn't carry emotion. It's just like, this is what happened today. It's kind of like the weather. It's like, oh yeah, it's sunny. You don't have to get angry about the fact that it's sunny or sad or whatever. Back in the day, news was more like that. It was just neutral. There was no editorializing. So notice that anytime you feel emotional manipulation, this is part of the design. It's by design. It gets you hooked on the news. It gets you hooked on the information. And once you have an emotional sting, you never forget the message. And often what happens is the message is untrue. What is initially implied is untrue. And then they backtrack later. But the emotional sting behind the original message, for example, what's going on in terms of the Hamas attacks in Israel, when the truth gets revealed afterwards, demonstrably, nobody's paying attention because the emotional sting was the imprint, the deliberate psychological imprint of the information that was communicated at the time. So all this to say, this is the same technique that was used against Julian Assange. So because he went against the United States, and especially what is known as the security state of the United States, so Pentagon and the war machine, he was attacked. And so all that propaganda is used against anybody who questions or points out, any whistleblowers who point out what the state is actually doing. And the attacks are ad hominem, they're personal. They are never on the merits of the information. They never actually address what the facts have revealed. They only go towards some kind of human failing, and that's often a setup, as it was in Sweden. I'm not going to go into the details there. That is something designed to discredit the individual. Now, everything if you follow the pattern, you see that throughout history, sexual scandals have been used always to set people up and affect their public image, because they're the things that create this kind of shock and disgust and exactly the emotional reaction that they want to reject this individual out of hand. And that discredits then whatever they say going forward. And that's exactly what the government did. It's exactly what the media did following along, even though initially the media, Guardian, the Times, etc., New York Times, printed the news that was revealed by Julian Assange. And so they benefited from it, and then later backed away and stopped supporting him. So the pariah image is deliberate. And so again, if many people still believe that he caused massive damage to US military overseas and to people who may have been killed by the information he revealed, and it has to be stated again and again that not one individual has died as a result of the revelations. And it also has to be said that the revelations of the US war crimes in Iraq, killing Reuters journalists, killing civilians on video, and all of this is captured on video, as was provided by Bradley Manning, then who became Chelsea Manning after having provided that information. All of that information led to the destruction of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, but nobody who actually did the illegal killing and those war crimes was ever convicted. So, again, the game is quite it's quite terrifying. And I just want to show this all by astrology, what the astrology is saying. So right away, we have a chart here. Remember, I use the whole sign system, tropical, We have Julian Assange, who was born the 3rd of July, 1971 at 3 p.m. This is quite accurate information, so I'm going with A-rated information in Townsville, Australia. And so here we have an ascendant in Sagittarius and a descendant in Gemini. So already the big theme of life here is issues around immigration, migration, beliefs and religion, political beliefs, persecution perhaps around that, especially as we have Saturn here and Neptune opposing Saturn on the ascendant. And then also where we find the North Node and South Node is the axis of authority and rebellion, and the axis of what is a collective identity compared to an identity of authority or self-image. We see in the South Node, for example, when it's in the sign of Leo, and then when the sun is in the 8th house or in the 12th house from the South Node, there are issues with the father. We see that anyway with the inconjunct between or what's also called a quincunx between the ascendant and the sun, what you could describe as daddy issues. We have a mother who's not in good form around the time of this birth. A mother relationship is difficult. She will have her own reasons. I'm not going to go into their family situation. There was a lot of tension and difficulty in the marriage as well as in the family situation. We see that also because Mars is on the IC, and a childhood that was divisive, difficult, not supportive. There was no sense of closeness in the family, no closeness in the tribe, as it were. Some kind of split, some kind of challenge. And this is actually what is the North Node in the 3rd house is really about seeking out this connection with a feeling of security, a feeling of wherever I am, I want to be grounded. And this combination of the ascendant of Sagittarius and the sun in Cancer is just this feeling of, I'm just never okay wherever I am. I just don't feel safe. I don't feel at home. I don't feel comfortable. I'm always questing, looking for something else. And we see that again represented by both the midheaven and the South Node in the 9th house. So the ruler of the 9th and the 8th does show there's this kind of tension around father. That's what you could describe as daddy issues. We see that also with this opposition of the ascendant and Saturn, mummy issues as well. And I just want to point out that we have somebody else has daddy issues and mummy issues. Maybe I'll just pull the two charts together. We'll take that just before we get the hearing chart. We'll just look at Assange, and this is the US chart. And I just want to point out the similarities. And so, of course, he's a thorn in the side of the US. He resembles so much of the US chart. There's such a speaking directly to the US chart in so many ways. The US chart has the same configuration, this ascendant in Jupiter ruled Sagittarius, and then the sun and many other planets, in fact, in the 8th house. And so the fact that Mercury is actually conjunct Mercury in the US chart just blows me away. I mean, there's just so many things here that really speak to a relationship of contestation or it's almost like the similarity is bringing almost like a psychic understanding of what you're dealing with, what you're grappling with. And I do think, Assange had this, he's got this kind of quality. What I would say if I were working with a client is this person has incredible perception. On a personality level, this can be quite challenging, but on the level of spirit, on the level of something that's coming from intuition, that's coming from guidance or wisdom that comes from somewhere else, it's off the charts. It's really amazing having a chart like this for intuition, psychic powers, deep understanding, and also with that Jupiter ruling the 1st from the 12th, we see that there's some kind of this frustration around self. There's I'm not fitting in, Uranus in the 11th house as well. I just don't fit in. And then when we see how that's connecting to the US chart, so now we have Assange on the inside and the US on the outside. We see how it's not, it doesn't feel comfortable. This chart is really challenging everything to do with Assange. So the nodal axis of the US chart is squaring his moon. And so, right off the bat, it's really hard. Synastry. Now, of course, it's going to be weird to do synastry between a country and a person, but it still speaks volumes. So we do have squares. So from the moon, the nodal axis is squaring the moon, and this is really deep, almost like karmic stuff. And then we have also, where was the other bit? We've got Uranus there on the descendant. So there's something that is in the US that is changing his relationship energy, which we can absolutely see. And we see that the US is like an enemy to him with Mars there in the seventh house. So there's so many things that we can say about this chart. I don't want to get too deep into it. So that the fact that Neptune is also, so this is the US Neptune, is also on his Pluto, it suggests that Julian is there really trying to understand, really going deep into what it is. And when Pluto is in Virgo, there's an unrelenting quality about finding truth. And in this case, it's in the 10th house of authority figures and image. And so the US image, as we've seen in other videos that I've done, is not what it appears. So Neptune in the 10th, it's like what you're seeing is the Disney version. You're not getting the real version. Now we could say the same about Assange, because when you have Neptune on the ascendant, people don't see themselves very accurately, and they can also shapeshift. And this is especially going to be true of somebody who doesn't feel at home. They kind of have to adjust and adapt constantly to what they think other people expect of them. And, there can be many reasons for that. They're not necessarily nefarious. But just to say that that's a really interesting synastry here, where we've got that Pluto. He's also got Lilith there in the house of authority. So there's, again, from this issue of early life and parenting, devastated expectations around family. It was really not easy for him. He reconciled with his father decades later. They didn't see each other for many years. And largely due to the fact that he's in crisis around this situation. We have Saturn conjunct, so the US Saturn is conjunct the Uranus in the 11th house of freedom and future. So we see that the goal of, the feeling of not fitting in, let's say, in terms of society, is also about having goals that are related to something different, something freeing, something liberating, something just and fair in the sign of Libra in the 11th house. And there's the US Saturn comes in and says, yeah, that's not going to happen, not the way you want it anyway. So there's a lot of oppression in the relationship, built into the relationship. We have Pluto, his natal Pluto is squared by the US Mars, so that's very clear. There's that drive of the opposition, and the US Moon is also triggering the Mars. And so there's literally the people of the US in a way against him, or the body, let's call it the public, believes that he's the enemy, and there's a feeling of unsafety because of him. Now, again, is that true? You do the research. I've done it for 14 years. So let's see, where else are we going? There were so many things I wanted to keep pointing out. Yeah, so Lilith in the US, Lilith, second house, again, referencing Capricorn, which is, again, this, remember the context of the independence struggle, which was against a monarchy that was oppressive, that was very much like the US today. And, we do become our parents, don't we? And so that's in opposition to his sun, very, very strong opposition. And it's also in a square to Uranus. So there's this tension, there's this feeling of injustice, there's this feeling of frustration. It's in a sextile to the moon as well, to his natal moon. And then, of course, we also have his Eris in, did I say Lilith? If I said Lilith, I meant Eris. So sometimes I mix the two up. It's Eris for short. Lilith is with his Chiron. So here we see there is an issue for Julian around self-expression, around being heard, around being seen, and can I be who I need to be? And there's a feeling of, for whatever reason, again, from childhood, from his early life experience, feeling of insecurity around that. And that comes from maybe also early life education, where he's had some very big challenges. So Mars is ruling the third house. The North Node is there. When North Node and Mars are together, there's some kind of potential for violence or potential for conflict, at the very least in words. And of course, we're looking at somebody who's writing all the time, who's publishing, who is really publishing about war. So it's literally a description of that. And then that Chiron and Eris together in the fifth shows also some aspect of education having been difficult, self-expression and self-acceptance having been difficult as well. But there we go. We see the same with the US. In the case of the US, it's obviously it's going to have a different feeling around that. But there is a feeling at the beginning of the United States as a country that there was no way to actually fully express themselves as they wanted to, and therefore they had to shed the domineering rulership of the monarchy, of the UK monarchy. So in both cases, we have Saturn, the US Saturn opposing Chiron is more tight in the case of Assange. So Assange's Chiron and Eris conjunction are very strongly opposed by the US. Now, I want to dip, and this is, by the way, the eighth house. All that energy in the eighth house is very much about secrets, very much about how you might be working in tandem with other people. And it also is people who are inherently curious about secrets. They operate based on secret exchanges or exchanges with other people. They benefit from exchanges with other people. So there's again that similarity with the US, except that the US has that on steroids, and it includes wealth accumulation, money, finance, etc., based on other people's money. Let's see. So I think I'm going to leave the that stuff for now, and I want to go now to the CIA. So the National Security Act is what established the CIA. So the CIA has really been the backdrop to this persecution. It is, you can connect the Pentagon with this, but it has roughly, a similar sort of starting point. I won't go into that because it was actually Mike Pompeo who was the leader of the CIA, and who just last week has been in Israel dancing with Israeli soldiers celebrating the genocide in Gaza, which, to give you an idea of the man. So here we have Pompeo, CIA, plotting to kill Assange. And so this is something that is known. It's been known for many years that there was a whole plan to kill the man, just assassinate him and just get rid of him to solve the problem of this embarrassment that the US is so angered by. So the CIA is also very deeply affecting the chart. So CIA itself has Pluto, Saturn, conjunction with Leo, Sun. And that Sun is actually in a square to Chiron. And so there is a certain amount of tension around the CIA. There was from the beginning. There were many people in the United States, believe it or not, many American lawmakers who were opposed to having this secret service because they saw the writing on the wall and they said, no, this is going to go pear-shaped. It's definitely going to be turned against us, and we can't risk that. But anyway, it got established. In many cases secretly. So again, here we have one more time the ruler of the ascendant in the 12th house. So this is again establishing something based on secrets. We see that in Assange's chart. We see it in the US chart with all of this 8th house and then the 12th house activity. But when we see the ruler of the first house in the 12th, we can see that there's some aspect of self that is hidden, some aspect that is the role of self is hidden. Let's take best case scenario. If you're an individual, because it doesn't mean you're a criminal, might do, but it doesn't have to. You might be a therapist, or you might be a doctor, or you might be someone who lives in an ashram or some kind of monastery or something like that. It's a hidden way of expressing yourself, which doesn't necessarily pose a problem. It's just that here we have this very strong energy of the 12th house. So this influence of the 12th house in Julian's chart, and that's affected by the Jupiter in the CIA's house of secrets, Scorpio. And so here we have the ascendant opposing the descendant, conjunct the Eris and Chiron. So that's the ascendant for the CIA. And then Neptune is on the Uranus for Assange. So Neptune on Uranus, that thing that he's trying to shake up and express, is part of the secrets. Again, Neptune being like the secrets that are being exposed. If we see the ascendant with Neptune, it's the same thing as Assange. Again, people who are either keeping secrets or needing to behave in a secretive way or working in a way that works with secrets. That can be even an actor, for example. They're not showing up as they actually are. Uranus, the CIA, Uranus is also conjunct Venus. And the Mars is in a sextile to the South Node and midheaven as well, from his 7th house to his 9th house. And that is also the same thing, the midheaven and the South Node in the 9th house of purpose and wisdom and justice and so on, is where we find the CIA's Pluto Saturn. So this is that action that's real. It's almost like compulsive. Anytime we see that Pluto, like I mentioned with Assange, that Pluto in Virgo especially, it's like it's compulsive. I have to do this thing. I need to, in his case, help and serve and be of service. In this case, it's about leadership. I need to dominate. The Pluto-Saturn conjunction in Leo, if that were an individual, that would be an incredibly powerful individual, to say the least, and hopefully not nefarious, but it can be, with the sun especially, the rulership, sun in rulership with the Pluto and Saturn there. And so this, of course, the Pluto-Saturn is opposing the North Node, Assange's North Node, in the 3rd house of communication and sharing information, publishing. It is the house of publishing, the 9th house, and the 3rd house is about the method of publishing. It's like newspapers and internet and so on. And he, by the way, that's that Uranus in the 11th. If we look at that from the point of view of disseminating information, he created a novel way for journalists to work. And it's because of him that journalists today, even the mainstream ones who are ignoring his plight, are able to use specific techniques to be able to send information without incriminating the provider of that information. And this is one of the things that the CIA is trying to actually block for all journalists. They want to control the narrative in many, many ways, not just the CIA, but what you call the security state, which is enormous by now. Uranus Mars is also in a trine to the Mars and IC, and that Mars, of course, is in a trine to the North Node. So this is from the house of relationship, really, really complicated relationships. This is also affecting issues like values. And of course, Venus and Gemini, if we think of it in terms of the values or relationships, it's about that mercurial capacity to change or to express the values. And so here we're finding this conflict in terms of having this debate or this conflict around values. If we're looking at it from the synastry point of view, if we're looking at it from Julian's point of view, it means that he's having difficulties in relationships, difficulties settling down, which he does. And he's got Saturn there too, meaning that relationships come later. And actually, I might just point that out, because he is married, and his marriage chart is here. And yeah, so everybody deserves happiness. You don't have to like the guy to want him to be happy. And so here we have the marriage. We've got now, this is why this is so huge, because what both was the marriage and also the extradition treaty, or the extradition trial, the initial one in 2022, really resonate with his natal chart. It's uncanny. So here's the marriage, Mars-Venus conjunction, which we're having this week, except that it's at 7 degrees. We had it 2 years ago-ish at, I think it was something like the 15th, the 17th degree. So that was on his IC, on the North Node, on the IC, and with Saturn on Mars. So we see they got married when he was in prison. Mars, of course, ruling that house of imprisonment, the South Node in the house of imprisonment, or in the house of confinement, you can call it, where there's a realization also around one's doings or one's activities or one's secrets or one's spiritual situation. Saturn is squaring the nodes here. So this marriage is huge. That nodal axis is squaring, building to a square with the Saturn-Mars conjunction. So that would be a couple of weeks later that he would have his nodal axis squaring Mars. Now, this marriage was a triumph for publicity for his cause. You see the moon in Sagittarius on the ascendant, super favorable, I think, in many ways for a marriage chart in the context of somebody who's marrying in prison for something that they didn't actually get charged with and who is being detained illegally. So in the context, it's a pretty good marriage chart. And we have a Chiron return building. And this is the thing I want you to keep noticing. The Chiron return is building at this point. This is March 2022, 23rd of March. I put a noon time because I wasn't sure. It was perhaps late morning or early afternoon. I couldn't find the actual time of their marriage, but if you do know the time, let me know in the comments. There might be a way to find it. I just didn't have the time to research. We do have Pluto in a trine to his native, Pluto and Black Moon Lilith. So this is a really big marker in his experience, in his life. A really big shift for him in terms of his sense of being grounded, which, remember, is one of his being founded in something that feels like calming down, finding a place that you can call home. The Mars and Venus conjunction on the IC on the North Node, stabilizing with Saturn there in its rulership, very strong Saturn. It's a way of feeling grounded, and that's actually part of his life quest. So again, really, I mean, it's just so incredible to follow this person's trajectory and so many others. He's not alone, but you just kind of hope for justice at least once in your lifetime. Are we going to find it? I'm not so sure. So here we have the Assange extradition order. So this is the 17th of June, 2022. So this is a couple of months after he's been married. That was one of the reasons he got married. It was he had already had children with Stella Assange, and they just wanted to finalize that because there was such a fear that he would be extradited, and that would obviously cause enormous complications for the children and for her as the partner. And it was also, just to stabilize their relationship at an incredibly testing time. So here we have this extradition order. The moon is now in the third house, along with Saturn, who's now retrograde, but still in an orb of conjunction with that Mars. And the Saturn is now squaring Jupiter. And also that moon is squaring the moon, almost like it's really creepy how powerful the astrology is here. The moon is also trining Uranus, and the ascendant for the day, meaning if we think of the moment of the sunrise on the day of the order, the extradition order, we have that where the Uranus is in the house of future, in the house of how I picture my life from the perspective of Julian Assange. And so this is an incredible shakeup. It is uncanny. It was really one of the biggest blows because legally it didn't have a leg to stand on. The British jurisdiction is highly dubious. It's going against its own laws, and as I mentioned already, international law as well as humanitarian law. It's just crazy how blatant this persecution is, and yet everybody's hysterical about Navalny. So here we have also Pluto backing up into the last degrees of opposition to Mercury. And again, Pluto here in the second house of values in this. And this, by the way, has been the story for Assange basically since Pluto moved in. So all of this crap started in 2009, 2010, when he got these files, especially 2010. And he got these files from now Chelsea Manning, who was then Bradley Manning, who was a soldier and who provided this information because she saw the crimes being committed on video and had access to the equipment. So she was acting as a whistleblower. He was acting as the journalist receiving this information. So all of this started when Pluto started moving through the second house. So that would have been, Pluto would have been developing, what would it be affecting by then? It would have certainly been in conjunct Saturn. It would, because it would only have been in the very early degrees. It may not, it wouldn't have even reached, I think, a sextile to the moon. But anyway, let's say, okay, going into the second house, it's basically been the story of Pluto in the second house for Assange, and now it's going in and out, and that becomes then a strong trine to Saturn now as we speak. This is the original extradition order that is being revised and heard today. That's why I'm bringing this one up. That has Mercury in the house of open enemies. It has Venus in her rulership on the North Node, conjunct Uranus in the house of legal issues, debates, discovery or challenges. Now we have the North Node with Uranus is it's like a crapshoot. It's kind of anybody's guess, really. And that again is building to a really strong square with the midheaven and Icy, and it's squaring Mars. So Mars that rules the South Node of imprisonment, squared by the nodal axis at the time of this hearing. So just bad news all around. And his sun happened to be on the midheaven of the day there as well. So he was in every newspaper. Even newspapers who had been ignoring it couldn't ignore this because it was such a miscarriage of justice. But hey ho, that's how we roll these days. And so we have Jupiter in Aries. What's going on with Jupiter? In a trine now to the ascendant, a trine to Neptune, and at the time of the marriage, I think he was even trining his Jupiter, but I forgot to check that. But anyway, okay, Jupiter would have been anyway trining that Neptune, and Jupiter is sextiling the descendant and Saturn conjunction. Jupiter is building to a square with the sun. It's already an orb, but it's building to exact. So yeah, I mean, gosh, there's so much here, and I don't want to make this a long video. The sun on the day is on the natal Venus within uncannily exact degree, and then we have an almost exact conjunction of Lilith, where there is a feeling of being pissed off, betrayed, abused. This is in the house of open enemies. It's so obvious. It's painfully obvious. I would love to hear in the comments how you're interpreting these things, because I haven't really, there's just so much going on here that it's almost overwhelming to try and do this alone, trying to piece together all of the meanings here. And then I wanted to show as well now the hearings of today. So this is now this morning. I am doing this at my lunch break. So it's like 1:15, where the trial would have started today. It's over 2 days, so 21st and 22nd. The supposed time of beginning the trial was 9:30 in London. And so that is the chart that we have for this trial. And I want to point out again this Chiron. Now we have Chiron exact on Monday, the 19th, still very tightly conjunct the North Node. And now everything that was going on in droves since the beginning of 2022, whether it be his extradition hearing, the marriage, and all of these issues around his own capacity to express himself, to be seen, to be valued, it's all coming back one last time with the North Node. And now the North Node is building over the next few weeks to a conjunction with Chiron, and that's where things will get real for him. The nodal axis will be squaring his sun through the spring. That's let me just double check when that's going to happen. I think that's probably going to be by late March, or maybe no, they're moving slow in the spring. They changed the rate. That's why I use the true node, not the mean node, for those of you who are interested in those kinds of things. So the nodal axis is going to be squaring the sun only in June by the true node. And so we'll get, yeah, it starts to square in June and it's exact in July. So I think that's when we will know the fate, the ultimate fate, let's say, of this situation. But if we come back to the hearing, I just want to point out a few of the things about the hearing. So the North Node now in the 5th house, this is about freedom of expression, speech. It's about his children as well. So this is going to be impacting his experience of his fatherhood. And we have Venus and Mars back together. Again, uncanny. And this time they are squaring the moon. I'm not sure this is going to work out so well for him. Saturn is trining the moon. The sun is building to a trine with the moon, and Saturn is trining the sun, and the sun is going to build to a trine with the sun. To be honest, I think the only thing that will save this situation is the fact that it is so egregious and so obviously politically motivated, militarily motivated, and so obvious that this man is close to death, certainly close to insanity. He's been in solitary confinement in Belmarsh prison, which is kind of like the Guantanamo Bay of the UK. It's where the worst, most dangerous criminals go. And the abuse is phenomenal. And this is a man, bear in mind, that has not been charged with a crime. The British have no reason to be detaining him except that they are doing the bidding of the US. So this is something that all I can say is that from an astrological point of view, this does not look good at all. It really doesn't look favorable. From a humane point of view, I think the one thing that might save him is the sheer unwillingness of the US establishment to push this right to the end. If he does get extradited to the US, the media in the US will have to cover this story, and they will also have to be aware that that's their fate as well. So if this does not work, if this extradition actually goes through, this is the end of what you could even remotely describe as what is left of open journalism today. And freedom of speech in terms of journalists. So it will have a chilling effect. That's the purpose. The moon and Jupiter opposition and the tense the building energy of this square of Mars, Venus, the moon, Saturn trining the moon. So much of this also describes somebody who is under deep emotional pressure. And remembering he is a human being. This is torture, and the UN rapporteur on torture for the last 8 to 10 years has already been speaking out about this and falling on deaf ears. He is considered to be one of the most prominent cases of torture by both the British and the US that we've ever really known. And certainly he's been 12 years detained without any charges. So I just wanted to bring this to everybody's attention. The moon is in a nakshatra called Pushya. Pushya is very favorable, but the moon in the 8th house is not great in terms of starting something, although it does pertain to secrets, and that's the basic premise of this entire thing. The moon is trining his Jupiter, and Jupiter rules Pushya nakshatra. So there's that one potential glimmer of hope, that there is some kind of benefit here. Jupiter is opposing his natal moon, and so there can be, and with the sextile to his sun, that might also bring some positivity. It is in the 6th house of overcoming obstacles and legal issues, disputes, contracts, and again, it's a house of enemies. The way you deal with them is the 7th house, and the issues that you're dealing with, the things that you're grappling with, is the 6th house in the way I read it. So yeah, he does have enemies, there's no doubt. That's that Jupiter in the rulership of the ascendant in the 12th house. It's it's in Scorpio. Jupiter in Scorpio can be some pretty intense stuff, especially with Mars connected to the North Node and the IC. So this is not an easy gig for him. This is definitely something that we should all be concerned about, because this is one of the steps towards a very unfree society that we're experiencing in many, many ways over the last 20 years or so. So I'll leave it there. I look forward to your comments, and please keep them focused on the issue, and especially insights that are astrological are really appreciated. Obviously, your political opinion is yours, but that doesn't make other people's opinions wrong. So let's try to stand for the freedom that everybody says that they want. They just only want their own freedom. Freedom means for everybody. Everybody needs to share in this freedom, regardless of where you come from and regardless of who you are, how powerful your enemies are. Oh, one last thing I wanted to say is by the end of this trial, the moon will be moving. So if we take this as a transit chart, the moon is moving. Hang on, what have I done? We want to go forward. So by the end of this trial, the moon is moving out of the 8th house and into, we'll go back hours here, and into the 9th. And that is one also favorable thing. Moon in the 9th house can bring better results. So this is over the 20th, 21st, and the results won't be heard for sure, but let's say the trial results will be, the discussion around that will be just at the time that the moon is moving into the 9th. And so that's one possible salvation where we have the moon then in trine to the ascendant. Yeah, even though the moon is in good dignity in Cancer, if it's in the 8th house, it's not great for these things. So the 9th house is justice. That's all we can say. All right, good. That's it. I'd love to hear your opinions. Please do share your ideas. I would really love to hear what you think about all of this, and let's hope for justice for all. Bye for now.